Lately, there's been a noticeable change happening across the music industry. And if you've been keeping up with the biggest artists in the game, you've probably felt that something isn't quite the same anymore. For more than a decade, a small group of superstar names has dominated the spotlight and shaped almost everything people listen to. But now, the landscape seems to be shifting in a way that's hard to ignore. Those very same artists are stepping away from long-term deals, cashing out valuable catalogs, and in some cases even distancing themselves from the personas that turned them into household names in the first place.
You're dropping the name The Weeknd, so I wanted to know your decision behind that, and why was this the right time for that?
We're brainstorming it right now. I feel like we don't have any definite answers, but yeah, that's where I'm at with
Let's
that.
start brainstorming together.
What makes this moment so unusual is that historically, artists who reach the very top do everything they can to hold on to that position for as long as possible. But if you look closely at what's happening now, some of the biggest names in music seem to be signaling that they're tired of the system that helped build their careers. Just look at Drake. For years, he represented exactly what major labels wanted, a reliable superstar capable of delivering huge numbers and keeping the machine running at full speed. Yet recently, the relationship between him and Universal Music Group has become increasingly complicated. We've watched him take the rare step of pursuing legal action against them, something you almost never see from an artist operating at his level while still actively dominating the industry. Most situations like this are usually settled quietly behind the scenes, buried under layers of attorneys, negotiations, and confidentiality agreements. Drake, however, appears determined to keep the conversation out in the open. In a way, he's challenging the same industry structure that played a major role in turning him into a worldwide phenomenon. At the same time, reports continue circulating that he may be exploring the sale of roughly half of OVO, and make no mistake, that would be a major shift. Moves like that make it seem as though he's either stepping away from the day-to-day responsibilities of running a label or preparing himself for an entirely new chapter. When an artist as powerful as Drake starts restructuring pieces of the empire he spent years building, it tells you something bigger may be happening behind the scenes. To many people, it feels like the traditional music business model simply doesn't hold the same appeal for him anymore. Then there's J. Cole, who has always chosen a different path from most of his peers. Anyone who follows hip-hop knows he spent years talking about the fall-off and building anticipation around it. Now that the project has finally arrived, the message attached to it feels impossible to ignore. From his own words and actions, it seems like he's treating this as the closing chapter of his run as a solo artist under the J. Cole name.
Which is the continuation of the J. Cole story. Jermaine's life story in the form of this J. Cole character. So when you hear me say, this is suicide note, come here, look what I wrote. I'm about to kill. It's me basically saying like, man, I'm done with that. I didn't.
According to Cole, he's no longer interested in continuing the traditional solo album cycle. Instead, he's looking toward a different role, one where he can focus more on producing records and helping shape the next generation of artists. He wants to spend his time behind the boards, developing talent and helping others discover their own creative identity. That's a significant shift when you consider that he's still widely viewed as one of the elite lyricists in the game. Realistically, he could keep releasing successful projects for another 10 years and fans would still show up every time. But from the outside looking in, it seems like he's no longer interested in carrying the weight that comes with being the centerpiece of every conversation. He still wants to contribute to hip-hop, just without all the pressure, celebrity drama, and endless race for chart dominance that comes with it. And then there's The Weeknd, whose recent decisions caught a lot of people completely off guard. The surprise factor was huge because we're talking about one of the most successful global artists of this era. Yet despite being at the top, he announced that the name The Weeknd is reaching its final chapter. In his view, that character has already told the full story it was created to tell. He's lived through every stage of that journey, from the darker and mysterious early years to the massive stadium-sized pop records that followed. He essentially let fans know that whatever comes next will look very different from what they've known up until now. Not long after those comments started making headlines, reports surfaced confirming that he had sold the catalog connected to that era of his career. And when artists make a move like that, it usually signals something much bigger than a simple business transaction. In many ways, selling a catalog is like turning years of work into immediate freedom and financial flexibility. It provides a major upfront payday while removing the responsibility of managing those assets moving forward. That's why many people see it as the ultimate fresh start move. It sends a message that he's ready for a new direction and doesn't want to remain attached to the chapter that first made him famous. Which brings us to the bigger question. Why does it feel like so many major artists are making these kinds of decisions at the same time? Why are some of the biggest names in music choosing to step away, reinvent themselves, or completely change the way they operate? There are actually several reasons behind this shift, and the first one is pretty straightforward. They want ownership and independence. For years, many of these artists have worked within massive agreements that influence release schedules, promotional plans, and how revenue gets divided. When you're an up-and-coming artist, those deals often provide resources and opportunities you can't access on your own. But when you reach the level of someone like Drake or J. Cole, you no longer need a label to introduce your music to the world. Millions of fans are already waiting for your next move before you even make it. At that point, the desire for complete control becomes much stronger. They want the freedom to release music whenever inspiration strikes, without needing approval from executives sitting in corporate boardrooms. By moving away from the traditional structure, they're reclaiming power over their own careers. Another major factor is creative burnout. The reality is that many of these artists have spent years playing versions of themselves that eventually became brands. The Weeknd is probably one of the clearest examples of that. He built an entire universe around a specific sound, image, and narrative that stretched across multiple projects. But eventually people evolve. You don't necessarily want to create the exact same art at 35 that you were creating at 25. Many of these artists feel like they've already explored every corner of that identity. If they continue repeating the same formula forever, there's a risk of becoming a watered-down version of themselves. So instead of watching the brand slowly lose its impact, they'd rather end a chapter while it still means something. They want to close one story properly before beginning another. J. Cole has hinted at a very similar mindset. From his perspective, his journey as a solo rap superstar may have reached its natural conclusion, opening the door for new creative challenges. For him, it seems less about retirement and more about finding new inspiration. It's about creating because you love the craft, not because the industry
expects another release. There's also another layer to all of this. Many of these veterans appear interested in creating a better path for the artists coming after them. They've experienced firsthand how difficult and unforgiving the business side of music can be. Through legal disputes, public negotiations, and independent moves, they're showing younger artists that there are alternatives. They're proving that life exists beyond the traditional label system. When someone as influential as Drake publicly challenges a company as powerful as UMG, it becomes a lesson for every artist paying attention. It reminds them to understand exactly what they're signing before putting pen to paper. And when J. Cole shifts toward production and artist development, he's putting himself in position to help guide the next wave directly. In many ways, they're rewriting the blueprint. They're showing that ownership, freedom, and creative control are possible, even at the highest level of success. That naturally leads to another question. What does all of this mean for the future of the music industry itself? If the biggest stars are changing course at the same time, who steps in to fill that space? We're seeing talented new artists emerge every year, but the system doesn't seem to manufacture larger-than-life superstars the way it once did. It feels like the industry is shifting towards something more fragmented. Instead of a handful of artists dominating everything, audiences may become increasingly divided across different communities and fan bases. People will support the artists they connect with most, and many of those artists will likely operate with more independence than previous generations. The era of the untouchable, label-built global superstar may slowly be fading away. And honestly, that could end up benefiting music in the long run. Artists often make their most interesting work when they're free to experiment without corporate expectations hanging over every decision. So when you hear about Drake's legal battles, J. Cole stepping away from the spotlight, or The Weeknd moving on from one of the biggest brands in music, don't automatically see it as decline. Instead, look at it as a strategic move towards something bigger. These artists appear to be positioning themselves for a future where they answer to fewer people and have more control over their own destiny. That's where things stand right now. There's a lot changing all at once, but one thing feels undeniable. The music industry is entering a completely different era. The moves being made today would have sounded almost impossible a decade ago. Yet here we are watching some of the biggest names choose freedom over tradition. They're walking away from old identities, restructuring their businesses, and trying to shape what comes next. For creators everywhere, that represents a major shift. But now, I want to hear from you. Do you think Drake is taking the right approach by challenging the system? Are you going to miss the Weeknd era, or are you excited to see what Abel does next? And when it comes to J. Cole, do you really believe he's finished as a solo rapper, or is there still one more chapter left to be written?